I want you to listen to this phrase from Colossians 3:1. Read this with me. It's on the screen. You have been raised with Christ. Say it again, only this time I want you to change the word you to the word I. Let's say it together. I have been raised with Christ. Think about that for a moment. What the book of Colossians says to us is that when Jesus was raised from the grave, it's not just some figure of history who experienced resurrection, but you and I are raised with Him. We are participants in the resurrection of Jesus. It is the moment that defines who we are. And if you believe that, and if you know that in your heart, then why would you continue to live like you're on death row? Why would you continue to live in fear when you know that you've been raised with the one who conquered the grave? It was for this reason that the Apostle Paul wrote these words to the church in Galatia. I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. You see, what Paul was saying is when Jesus died on the cross, I died with Him. It was my sin that placed Him there. And it is my sin that died on the cross that day. My sinful self died on the cross with Jesus. I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live. But when Christ was raised from the dead, I was raised with Him. And so it is Christ who lives in me. I now live with Christ for eternity. Now, here's the mistake we often make. We assume that eternal life begins when we die. But the reality is that eternal life begins today, right now. Your life with Christ has already begun. You have been crucified with Christ. You no longer live, but Christ lives in you. And by the power of Christ, you can experience a taste of heaven even today, even in the midst of our broken world. And the message of the book of Colossians is, if we've been raised with Christ, then we ought to embrace that new reality, the new you that is possible from knowing Jesus. And so it says, put to death the old self. Put to death the practices of a life enslaved to sin and death. Don't allow anger to rule your heart. Put away your greed and your idolatry. Put away your abusive language to one another. We don't have to live that way. Because Jesus is alive, we can love, not hate. We can forgive, not hold a grudge. We can have joy, even in our sorrows, because we know that Christ has claimed the ultimate victory. When we know that Jesus is raised from the dead, it changes our world. And there's a new way to be human.